Labor has won the New South Wales seat of Bega in yesterday's by-election. It's the first time the party has ever held the traditionally Liberal seat. There was a 14% swing against the Liberals in this South Coast seat, and this, of course, is where the bushfires hit in the summer of late 2019 and early 2020. There have also been massive swings against the Liberal Party in other seats. Gladys Berejiklian's old seat of Willoughby had an 18% swing against it, 18%. And this is based on votes cast yesterday and not pre-polls. The Liberal Party is understandably in shock today after this disastrous result. And the question that everyone is asking is this a reflection of what's in store for the federal Liberal Party come the election, or is this a reflection of the new Premier, Dominic Perrottet? Perrottet has in part blamed the bushfire saga for the defeat in Bega.
I think the bushfires, the most striking thing to me is it's a community that's hurting. It's a community that's struggling to recover from the devastating bushfires, the loss of life, the loss of property. The hurt and pain is still very raw, and governments need to be there to help our communities through.
And New South Wales Treasurer Matt Keane, a vocal opponent of Scott Morrison, he also says there is no doubt in his mind that the last fortnight in federal politics in Canberra damaged his party's chances in the by-elections.
Well, there's no question the last couple of weeks at the federal level hasn't helped at these by-election campaigns. But, I mean, at the end of the day, these elections are being fought on local issues.
The Prime Minister points out that 3 of the seats were sparked by popular local members retiring. Of course, Berejiklian, along with Andrew Constance in Bega, who's moving to federal politics, and John Barilaro, who was the Deputy Premier in Monaro. With Constance moving to Canberra in the seat of Gilmore, Morrison says this actually bodes well for the federal election.
We had the retirement of some very successful local members in Gladys Berejiklian, a former leader, John Barilaro, a former Nationals leader, and you could expect that in those seats there was a very strong following for both of them, and indeed for Andrew Constance. I'd also commend an outstanding job by Bridget Saker in the seat of Strathfield. I mean, this is a Labor-held seat, previously held by the state Labor leader, and this postal's still to come, and Bridget, I mean, as you normally get swings against governments in by-elections, and particularly in a Labor-held seat.
While the state Labor leader, Chris Minns, says the result speaks to Perrottet's handling of the Omicron outbreak, federal Labor, of course, is on the same song sheet as the Perrottet government in blaming Scott Morrison.
I think federally there are a few implications, and let me go through them quickly. One, in Bega, the biggest swings against the Liberals were in areas that were most affected by the bushfires. And we see that there are voters who remember a Prime Minister who went to Hawaii while their homes were burning down, and that he doesn't hold a hose. In Strathfield, the biggest swings against the Liberals were in areas in that seat where there are a high proportion of Australians of Chinese background. And it shows a rejection, a repudiation of Peter Dutton's divisive tactics in the Parliament this week. It shows it's dangerous territory, not just for our national security, but dangerous territory for the Liberals' electorate.
Let's bring in the Daily Telegraph's state political reporter, James O'Doherty, for his analysis. James, thanks for your time. We've just seen there a blame game unfolding between the New South Wales Libs and the federal Libs, and Labor having their 2 cents. How much blame can actually be laid at the federal party for these results, particularly the loss in Bega?
Look, Sherry, probably not much. I mean, Matt Keane there saying that the last couple of weeks have been damaging to the Liberal Party brand. There's probably some truth that it hasn't been the cleanest couple of weeks for Prime Minister Scott Morrison, but traditionally voters do know how to delineate between state and federal issues. Importantly, Dominic Perrottet took full responsibility for the results we saw last night. I put to him that Matt Keane has blamed part of the federal government's response over the past couple of weeks for the results. Perrottet rejected that assertion, claimed full responsibility, said that it was on his head. Look, Liberals were somewhat worried in the lead up to these by-elections that voters would use the opportunity to damage or mark down the federal government by voting down the state government here in New South Wales. But look, I think you'd have to say that the majority of these by-elections were fought on local issues with a bit of Dominic Perrottet's premiership thrown in. As you rightly point out, there were 3 very high-profile, very popular local members that were retiring, Sherry.
Do you think these results have caused some concern, some fear among federal Liberals today?
Well, look, given that I think most of these results were based on the departure of fairly high-profile MPs in Andrew Constance, Gladys Berejiklian and John Barilaro, I think that federal Liberals won't be quaking in their boots at these, but there is some worry, particularly in the North Shore of Sydney, where the Liberal candidate Tim James suffered that 18% swing against him to a high-profile local independent. I think
and
the federal
important to point
Liberals
out,
up that way, like Trent Zimmerman.
And important to point out, Labor wasn't actually running in that seat.
Yes, indeed. That vote really went to that local independent there, Larissa Penn. She is a candidate that has been campaigning on a local issue of the Northern Beaches Link and Western Harbour tunnels. Now, that does bode not particularly well for the likes of Trent Zimmerman, who is already a little bit worried about these cashed-up independents, the teal independents, if you were. So, look, I think if you were in that section of Sydney in the Liberal Party, you might be a little bit worried. It's a bit worrying for the Liberals generally in New South Wales, but like I said earlier, I don't think there is an awful lot of federal implication that you could draw from this. Some, but not a whole lot.
What I find interesting is that this is the first state poll, and of course it's not a full state election, but the first state poll where we've seen massive swings against the incumbent government during the pandemic. You know, in other states, we've seen almost landslide victories for the incumbent. Do you think this says something about the approach New South Wales took in terms of leaning towards opening up rather than restrictions and lockdowns?
Well, you're right. I mean, we have seen massive swings against the government here, whereas in other parts of Australia, incumbents have been re-elected very comfortably, Mark McGowan in particular. Look, these are by-elections, though, so I think that I'd be wary of reading a whole lot into it at a statewide level. As I said, there are very popular local MPs, Gladys Berejiklian, John Barilaro, Andrew Constance. These are big names, and they've been there for a long time. They were departing. We've got a new premier. In Bega, there was an excellent candidate, Michael Holland, against Fiona Cotvoice, who's run unsuccessfully twice. So maybe we're at a point in time where that pandemic vote is changing now that we're coming out of the pandemic. That could be one reason for that. Another reason is, as you point out, people might be marking down Dominic Perrottet for his response, in combating the virus. But if that was the case, you'd probably think that the Strathfield vote would be more favouring Labor or more marking down the Liberal Party, considering that Strathfield is one of the electorates that encompassed the LGAs of concern under some of the harshest lockdown measures last year. So, look, again, it's probably predominantly due to some fairly significant local issues in each of these 4 by-elections.
Yes. You can't help but wonder, though, how different the results might have been had Gladys Berejiklian still been Premier and there was that statewide support for her and the party, and it was just so high. You know, you can't underestimate the disappointment among, mainstream people in New South Wales when she lost her job. James O'Doherty from the Daily Telegraph, thank you for your time.